We have an issue in our current implementation, and that is that we don't have a single source of truth. Let me show you this using an example. So here on the top, I want to add a button for resetting all the counters. So let's go back to our counters component. Here in the render method, on top of all these counters, let's add a button with a few classes: btn, btn-primary, btn-small, and margin2. And we're going to call this reset. Now, let's handle the click event. We're going to set this to this.handle reset, just like before. Nothing new so far. And here I'm going to implement handle reset. We set it to an arrow function. And in this method, just like our handle delete method, we want to create a new array of counters and call this.setState. So we get the existing counters, this.state.counters. We use the map method to get each counter and reset its value to 0 and then return it. So with this, we'll get a new array of counters. Let's store them here and then call this.setState with this new array. So save the changes back in the browser. Let's click the reset button. Look, nothing is happening here. Why is that? The reason is because we don't have a single source of truth. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to open up the Chrome Developer Tools. Let's go to the React tab. So here's our counters component. Look at the state for this component. We have an array of 4 counter objects. If you look at one of these counters, you can see its value is 0. So we successfully updated the state, but we are not seeing the changes in the DOM. Let's take a look at one of our counters. So expand this. Here's our first counter. Look at its props. We have this counter object that we passed from its parent. Look, the value is 0, but we don't see that on the view. Instead, we see 4. So the issue we're facing here is that we don't have a single source of truth. Each of our components have their own local state. Our counters component has an array of counters, and each counter component has a value. This value is currently disconnected from the value property of each counter object that we have in this array. Here's the implementation of our counter component. As you can see here, we're initializing the value property of our state object based on what we get from our props. This piece of code is executed only once when an instance of a counter component is created. So that's why when the page loads, we get the initial value here, and we can increment it because this is a local state in our counter component. But when we click the reset button, the local state of this counter component is not updated. So how can we fix this problem? We need to remove the local state in our counter component and have a single source of truth. And that's the topic for the next lecture.